Welcome to the Heart of Dad podcast. Heart of Dad is a podcast for entrepreneurs who are passionate about their families and business and looking to find more clarity, more balance and more alignment in all areas of their life. Come and join the community at heartofdad.com or on Facebook at groups/Heart of Dad. This week on the Heart of Dad, I'm delighted to welcome Rob Ashton. Rob is the founder of Emphasis, which he started in a 10-foot by 10-foot square cage more than 20 years ago and has since grown to become a world leader in text-based communication training. At the last count, his company was working in 32 countries around the globe. He says words and their effects on us fascinate him, claiming that getting them wrong lies at the heart of a huge number of misunderstandings, conflicts and failures in relationships, at work and at home. Yet so much of what passes for communication advice seems to be based on little more than pseudoscience and wishful thinking. Rob lives in Brighton in the UK with his wife and 2 teenage children. And I hope you're going to love this interview. It's a great one.
Well, hello, I'm Rob Ashton. I'm the founder and CEO of Emphasis, which is a training consultancy focusing exclusively on text-based communication. And we're based in Brighton in the south of England.
Hi, Rob. You're really welcome to the Heart of Dad podcast. It's great to have you on the show this week.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So tell us a little bit more about Emphasis. It's a business that's been around for quite some time now.
Yeah, it's been around for what feels like a very long time, and yet no time at all. It's been around for over 20 years. I set it up in 1998, which actually my poor maths corrects me to should be 21 years. So it's I set it up in a very small office, so that it was just 10 foot by 10 foot square, and we've since grown to become, I guess, a world leader in our field. It's admittedly a very specialized field, but it's our privilege to work with a huge range of organizations and people within those organizations. We run training courses and we help them directly through consulting to be a lot more effective whenever they put fingers to keyboards. So they could be writing emails to customers, they could be writing bids and proposals for contracts worth hundreds of millions, or they could just be messaging their colleagues within the organization. Basically, if it involves written communication, then that's very much our beat.
Fantastic. Such an important area as well. And I know in our own personal chats, we've explored a little bit together about how this one thing could have such a big impact in the world if it was better handled, better understood, better skilled.
Yeah, I mean, it's so easily overlooked, and I've very deliberately used the phrases text-based communication and written communication rather than writing skills, even though our website URL is writing-skills.com. The reason for that is because if you say writing to most people, they will, in our context, they'll misunderstand, usually misunderstand what we do through no fault of their own. Writing is one of those things that's a hidden activity. So they might think that we're teaching people to write fiction, for instance, or to improve their handwriting even, and overlook the fact that written communication has become the default mode of communicating with each other. We've somehow stumbled into this situation where we'll almost rather write to people than talk to them. You know, if my phone rings, if my mobile phone actually rings, I assume something must be wrong, or this is some really urgent issue. I'm just not expecting it to happen. It rings so infrequently. It's called a phone, and yet I use it for writing. And that's true of most people, I think. So we're doing it all the time. We spend a huge part of our working lives doing it, a huge part of our days, not just at work. We're doing this really from the moment we wake up to the moment we turn out the light and go to sleep. The whole of our days is taken up with writing. Now, the thing is that we assume, therefore, often that it's something that we don't need to think about, whereas nothing could be further from the truth, and that's why it goes wrong so many times, and that's why, for instance, people end up in whole arguments by text message that may last days. Sounds crazy, but it's true.
Yeah, and big decisions in life get made by text now, don't they? Like ending relationships and
Oh, yeah.
buying significant things, or giving up on things, or resigning, or even applying for a job. I mean,
it's do you know, years ago, before in a previous life, I was working as it was one of my first jobs in publishing, and I was working on a magazine that had a very small editorial team. There were just, I think then there were three of us in the main editorial office, and which is often the setup in magazines, incidentally. And one day, my boss came in, the editor of the magazine, as he often did, having been upset at some point. He was clearly upset. You know, he was oozing stress and tension, and you could tell that something had really got to him. And he walked into this small office, and you can imagine the negative energy coming off of this guy. And he sat down at no more than, I guess, a couple of meters away from me, and looking really tense. And then you just had this, it had a virtual black cloud above his head. And I looked at the editorial assistant in the office, and she looked back at me and we thought, oh, cool, you know, raised our eyebrows. And this guy just stayed in this state for a good 20 minutes, half an hour. And then about an hour later, he apologized and explained that he'd had a bad start to his day and he's sorry he was a bit grumpy. But he didn't apologize by speaking to us. He apologized by email. And I was just astounded. You know, there are only two of us in the office, and we're right there, and he emails us. And I was just thinking, why do you think that makes it better? It sounded nuts to me. And I suppose maybe the penny dropped back then that this was just something that was going to be, I don't know. I'd like to say that you know, I had huge foresight and I knew that was the way it was going to be, but it certainly stuck with me. And now, yeah, as you say, Matt, that's what people do. They will do all sorts of things, not just apologizing, but dumping people, resigning. And it's a really bad idea because we think that written communication is, as I said, it's something we take for granted. We think it's easy simply because we can do it. But if you just think for a second what we're doing when we do that, we are looking at squiggles on a screen and we are hearing words in our head. That's what you do when you read, isn't it? You look at squiggles on a screen and you hear words in your head. How amazing is that? It's a miracle of adaptation. And I say adaptation deliberately because it's not a miracle of evolution, because we didn't evolve to read and write. We evolved to speak and listen. They've even found evidence of vocal apparatus in fossils of fish from millions and millions of years ago. Mm-hmm. But actually, we only started to use symbols, which is what reading and writing is. We only started to use symbols to communicate about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, which may sound like a long time, but it's just a heartbeat in evolutionary terms. And it's definitely not enough time to evolve structures that are specifically for the task. And so what we do is we co-opt other structures in our brains that we evolve for lots of other things, and we join them together. And it's a hack. Reading and writing is a hack. It's a brain hack. And it works really well, but it takes an awful lot of energy. And that's why we get it wrong. That's why we have these arguments, because it uses so much energy, so much brain power, that it leaves very little room for thinking about the consequences of what we're doing, very little room for self-control. So it draws us in because, we've got no self-control. It overcomes our willpower, and then we type to each other. We hear the words in our head. Of course, doesn't mean we're hearing the words that people are typing, because we can't hear the tone. And then we go down this rabbit hole of communication so often, and so often it really ends badly. It's a minefield, and it's something that we really shouldn't take for granted. And hopefully that explains why it goes wrong so often.
Such a brilliant topic, and we could spend the whole episode just talking about that.
I know I could.
Well, it's great. It's great to hear your passion for it and insight as well, Rob. But I want to. This podcast is about entrepreneurs who are dads as well, and I suppose one of the things that struck me. I don't think you mentioned this in your introduction, but you have two children who are teenagers now, and I think from their ages they were born after you started your business. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So the first one was born 3 years after I started my business, and then the second one was 3 years after that. So 4 years after that. So it's it's the business. In fact, things really changed. I just remember that feeling when I became a dad, and how differently I felt about my role. And I just remember going down an escalator down into a tube station in London, having just come off of paternity leave, having become a father for the first time, and I just had a slight spring in my step. I had I felt particularly motivated, but I also felt, crikey, it's not just about me anymore. And it's not just even about me and my wife. This takes things to a whole new level, and I certainly viewed things in a very different way from that point on.
That's really interesting to hear, and I was wondering, particularly, we've both sort of talked before about the ups and downs of entrepreneurship and the responsibility. Particularly, you're the owner and CEO or managing director of your own business, so it can be a lonely place to be. And if you've got young children at the same time, that burden of responsibility must be quite something, I imagine. I'm just wondering how that played out for you, having to invest yourself in your business, but also trying to find your feet as a dad as well.
I think it's always, certainly I've found that I've often been in conflict because you're torn between wanting to grow the business and provide a better standard of living and provide for your family, and I think we often end up wanting, rightly or wrongly, wanting to give our kids the things that we never had, or the opportunities that we never had, and I say rightly or wrongly because I don't want to fall into the trap of thinking that good parenting is just providing bigger and bigger and more expensive toys. But that's definitely been a massive driver, just providing for them and making their lives as best as I can. But of course you're conflicted because that often means working late. I'm fortunate in that I don't tend to work away from home, away from our hometown very often, and I have a very short commute. But it does mean being distracted, and I have to say, the thing I'm most guilty of in that respect is just being perpetually distracted. I have my boss is in my head, and he can be a bit of an arsehole sometimes. So it's that can be very, very difficult. But of course, good ideas don't run to time either. So you can have a really good idea just as you've got out of the shower. I often have my best ideas on a Sunday, right, by the time I've kind of detoxed from the working week a little bit. And then what do? I know if I don't get that idea down, then it will definitely be gone by Monday morning. And where does that stop? You make notes, and then you're carried away with your idea, and you're getting really excited. But it's Sunday morning, and your family is there expecting you to be present with them, not unreasonably. So I think those two things are perpetually in tension.
I think every entrepreneur dad listening would resonate with what you've just said, and that driving creative force that makes it exciting and makes you successful at what you do can also be in deep tension with having a child or children at home. And we've been exploring the concept of balance, or the myth of balance, should we say, in these podcasts. And I just wonder what your take on that was. I mean, you've kind of been touching on it already, Rob, but how did you make the space, if you needed to, for your children, or was that actually impossible given how much was on your shoulders with your business?
I think amazingly, after 21 years, it's still a work in progress. It's still a conflict, and I think that's just the nature of the human brain. You can't compartmentalize your thinking. You can't say, right now I'm thinking about my kids because, or now I'm thinking about work, because work, I'll often think about my kids when I'm thinking about work or about my family. And then when I'm thinking about my family, I'll often have an idea about work. So I don't think you can compartmentalize thinking. I think in terms of what you do, I have to be completely candid. I don't think I've got it right. It's just something that's still very much a challenge. I'm being honest there. Sorry.
No, I appreciate it, and I think it's incredibly empowering when people show their vulnerability about this, and that's really that my kind of number one priority with this podcast is to have really real conversations about this kind of stuff, because I think you can get so kind of caught up in kind of rah-rah versions of fatherhood or entrepreneurship and then kind of a fakeness about it, which really doesn't serve anybody, because everything you've said to me so far, I'm thinking, yeah, that's me too. Right. And I think pretty much everybody listening would be saying that as well. But I guess I'm also curious about kind of some of the finer details, if I may, like what's been your view around like holiday taking, and do you make a clean separation with your work at that point, or does your work come with you on holiday?
That's something I have got better at. Not necessarily taking holidays. It's my wife tends to organize them, and to my shame, they probably wouldn't happen if it were left to me. But for years, I used to take my business with me simply because I could. I would take a laptop, and I would stay connected. And the first thing that happened once we got to wherever we were staying is I'd log on to the Wi-Fi, and then I would relax, because I felt that I'd reconnected the umbilical back to the office. And then there was one particular holiday that we had where we sent out an email, we sent out a mailer, and I actually, I hadn't even disconnected on the plane, so I actually wrote this emailer, this something that was pointing to a blog post, and the blog post itself. I wrote those things on the plane, and I made, as we all do, I made a silly punctuation mistake, and it was just a typo, and I didn't spot it, because it's very hard to spot your own mistakes. But unfortunately, my colleagues somehow missed it as well. And this email went out to about 10,000 people on our list. And so when I logged on to Wi-Fi, when we got to our accommodation, I didn't get this sense of relief. I got this overwhelming sense of horror, because suddenly my inbox was filling up with, with grammar Nazis, basically, who just were, I think rightly appalled that an organization that professed to teach people better writing had made such a basic error. If you're wondering what it was, I'd used an apostrophe in the word "it's" when it's possessive.
Goodness
Very common.
gracious, Rob. I mean, I'm disappointed you're not prostrating yourself now. Absolute shame.
I, I had the horror still, but at the time it was like, oh my god, what have I done? What have I done? Because these people, I think what it represented actually was the tension that had built up around the business, and the tension, the pressure I'd put on all of us here at Emphasis to get things right, and it's. We're far more relaxed about it now. We try our best, but we know that mistakes happen. We're not superhuman. Um, but I then emailed one of my marketing team saying, "Oh no, you never believe what's happened," and I managed that situation. And I wrote, I personally replied to every person who'd written an email complaining about this mistake, about this heinous crime. Um, and I even had some nice emails back, some lovely emails back. So that was great. But my goodness, this lasted days, this debacle. I was just, I
Did it
was
ruin your
so,
holiday?
I was so distracted and tense, and angry. Really, I was, and I I decided that I wasn't going to do that again. The penny dropped, and I thought I'm never doing that again. And so now when I go on holiday, I certainly don't take my laptop. And I just put my autoresponder on, and sometimes I check Slack, sometimes I don't. Um, it's better when I don't. I mean, I have a great team. I could step away from this business for months and nothing would go wrong. They would run it perfectly well without me. They don't. It's I can unplug for a week.
It's such a good place to get to, isn't it? Because I was remembering, my kind of not exactly the same story, but I remember being on the beach in Catalonia, doing a conference call with one of our biggest clients, and my partner at the time looking at me in disbelief, really, that here we were on our annual holiday, and I was rolling my sleeves up and getting into this call. And I think, like you, it was a watershed moment. So I realized actually that I had a team around me then that could handle it. I didn't need to be on every single call. And I think for business owners, you have so much skin in the game. And it's not just about the financial investment, but actually it's the emotional investment in the brand, the image, and also the customer experience, isn't it? Which makes it sometimes unbearable to take your hands off the wheel. And it's only when you have one of those kind of oh shit moments, excuse my swearing, but that you take stock, don't you, and think actually this isn't serving me or my customers or my team or my health or my family or anything really.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Matt. You take it so personally to begin with, and every complaint can really just be like a punch to the solar plexus. It's because you feel it's very easy to just feel like you failed every time you get a complaint like that. Well, certainly that's what I felt in the past. I'm a bit, fortunately, we don't get many complaints, but it's in a situation like that. I definitely felt personally that I felt it was a personal failing. Um, and it sounds so trivial now. I just look back on it and think, what was I thinking? How could I have got into that state?
Right.
Um, but yeah, it's just. I mean, that picture you paint of being on the beach, that's supposed to be the entrepreneur's dream, isn't it? The laptop millionaire. Look at me running my business from everywhere. Aren't I great? It's.
Yeah, that was definitely the antithesis of that experience.
Yeah, it's not. It's like, why?
Yeah.
Somebody said to me once, sandy beaches and laptops are never a great combination anyway.
So true. So true. I wanted to ask you, Rob, given that your business has grown, a little bit ahead of your children, but pretty much in step, so they're approaching their late teens and and whatever's going to come for their life ahead of that. But I'm wondering, like, to what extent have you involved them in your business or an understanding of your business and what it is and its ups and downs and twists and turns?
I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but quite a lot. I mean, it's very hard for me to, as you will have heard, I'm a very open person, um, and that's certainly the case at home. I will often talk about work, um, but then, my kids, that they've given me advice sometimes that I've just taken on wholesale. I just thought, yeah, that's great. So there's often real payback. I'm writing a book at the moment, and I've been researching it for 3 years, and I got really into a particular piece of research, and I was discussing it with my daughter because I just said, look, I found out this thing, and I knew she'd get it, So I, I I told her what this thing was, and I said, "Isn't that amazing? I'm going to put that in the book." And she looked at me and she said, "Don't take this the wrong way, Dad." She's always a good start, She said, "I can see how you find that really interesting because you've got really, really into it. But I really don't think that your readers would find it as interesting as you do because they haven't got all that other stuff. They haven't looked into it as deeply as you have. So I don't think it's as interesting as you think it is." And I was slightly crestfallen.
Body blow.
And then I thought, oh, yeah, she's right. So it was wonderful because she saved me an awful lot of work there. But
And it's great that you have that relationship where she can say that, and it's okay.
yeah, I mean, I'm very fortunate. We are very, very honest with each other. I think about my relationship with my parents and the relationship I have with my kids. In some ways it's the same, but in many ways it's so different. And that openness is one of those ways. The fact that we can talk about absolutely anything, but that includes the business. We do chat about it. I mean, I can't help chatting about it.
It seems to me that when that it's kind of part of the entrepreneur's lot, isn't it? Because the family is so dependent on the positive flow of
Yeah,
the business and its creation of sufficient resources to support the family that plays out in front of the children, whether you talk about it or not. So I love the fact that you kind of bring it alive for them because I'm sure they would have a sense of it. There are always down times as well as up times, and you can't hide those really, even if you don't talk about it. So I think being able to talk about it is really, really refreshing and open.
yeah. I mean, honestly, I think I do wonder sometimes. Am I? I mean, I don't tell them everything, but I tell them quite a lot, and I do wonder sometimes if I'm putting too much on their young shoulders. They, but they, it's amazing how often both of them have come back with absolute pearls of wisdom, and it makes me so proud. But it's also been extremely helpful. That for there to be such an age gap, and it's a lot of the good conversations we have are in the car. I think partly because they're a captive audience, and partly because there's something about both facing the same direction. You're not looking at each other, and we often have some really honest conversations. And I'll often just voice something that's on my mind about work, and the number of times they've come back and said something that sometimes I apply it directly, sometimes I think, yeah, that's great, but more often it's just something that makes me think about things differently. It might just be, I think you need to let that go, Dad. It's, I mean, where did I get this from?
Love that.
It's been so helpful, and usually I think, oh, all right, yeah, okay. And partly, I have to say, partly it's because you just feel in those situations, you think, I can't possibly just hold on to this, this stress or this grudge or whatever it is, this thing I'm angry about. I can't possibly hold on to that because I will be a disappointment in the eyes of my children. So it kind of guilts you into
Yeah.
taking a much healthier attitude.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, you've just spoken two words that I'm really interested in these podcasts, and I think if we can sort of follow into that a little bit, and that's the anger and guilt. Right. So I thought maybe we could start with guilt because everybody I speak to, and
Yeah, why not?
I'm in this position absolutely myself, and it's partly why I've started the podcast. Is that feeling of how you talked about it earlier about conflict and balance and the myth of balance, and I'm wondering. When you get very focused, listening to you and speaking with you, Rob, I always see that you get very energized about your ideas. You're a very creative soul, and obviously that's brilliant for being an entrepreneur and business owner. And I guess there are times when that is so absorbing, as you were saying earlier, that it takes you away from perhaps time or attention for other people. I'm talking about myself here, so I'm guessing it might be the case for you. Please do correct me if I'm
No, it is.
wrong. Yeah. So I'm just wondering how whether you have experienced guilt in that when that happens, and what you do with it if it does.
Yes, I do. Sometimes I handle it okay. Often I don't. I think it's very much the entrepreneur's lot that it's almost a compulsion. It can be. You feel like you have no choice but to work, not because you're horrendously in debt. I mean, I certainly had to dig myself out of quite a big hole in the early years, but more because it's just what you do. I can't think of retiring. It is, I'm driven by our mission, if you like. And so I'm driven by our mission, and I have a big commitment to the people here in the organization. And I'm, very much issues focused. So I feel like I'm very fortunate. I've discovered something that I really care about, and I happen to be building a very successful and profitable business around it. So it, often I do feel guilty because it's not even something. It takes a lot of effort to put work down. I think that's the thing, and I'm sure many of your listeners will identify with that feeling.
Yeah,
I'm sure I'm not alone in that, and I don't always feel great about it. But so yeah, I do feel guilty.
Well, I mean, how does it play out with your kids? Have you? I mean, some people resort to kind of boundary time, like they'll say, well, Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon or whatever will always be family time. Others just go with the flow more and say, well, okay, I do commit to showing up as best as I can, given the other pressures in my life with my kids. How have you worked that out yourself?
Well, do you know that there are upsides to running to being an entrepreneur dad, as well as downsides. I have enormous flexibility. So I've always been able to attend nativity plays and school concerts, and take my son to his swim meets, and my daughter rides, and I spend every Sunday afternoon with her. That's really good because I can't really do any work while I'm doing that, so that's wonderful. But it means also I can leave early if I need to. So I do show up quite literally when I need to. The downside, as I mentioned, is that I might show up, but I'm not always present. My mind might be elsewhere. So
did your kids ever call you out on that?
Do they call me out? Yeah, sure they do. I can't think now, but I know as soon as we stop speaking, I will think of an instance.
My son says, put
they're not. Sorry,
my son says, put your phone away.
Phone away. Yeah, that's absolutely. They they know. But one thing I was going to say was, in the early years, that was definitely a thing. But they're teenagers now, So, I'm much more likely to be telling them to put their phone away.
Yeah.
And it's, that's the shifting dynamics for family, isn't it? As your kids get older, things change, the rules change. Maybe that's another reason why we don't have hard and fast rules, because you need to continually adapt. One other thing, actually, I should mention it is uh, that it works both ways. You can be at work, you can be running your business, um, but actually you're still connected to home, and so and that's the nature of text-based communication. Of course, you can be anywhere when you get a message, um, and that's not limited to just messages from clients. I get messages from my wife, for instance, about things that are happening at home, and I might be in an important meeting. She doesn't know where I am, and you look at it, and then suddenly you're kind of, if you're not careful, drawn right back into what could be a terribly emotionally charged situation.
So true.
um, and But I don't. Of course, it's not just entrepreneurs who suffer that. Although, as entrepreneurs, or as heads of business, nobody at work is going to tell us to put our phone away. Nobody at work is going to say, can you just focus on the matter in hand, please? Um, and so it does mean that you are open to that if you're not careful.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
don't know what the answer is. I don't. It's because as soon as you say, I'm at work, it's kind of, then you feel guilty. Then you really do feel guilty and conflicted, because those boundaries are blurred, and that effect works in both directions.
That's such a powerful point you're making, because what I hear in that is there's there's an internal monitoring system, in a sense. The boundaries are artificial in that sense. When you own your business, you have so much freedom, as you say, in some ways, and so little freedom in other ways. But that sort of modulating between family and work is within your gift in a way that it isn't if you're an employee. And so notions of boundary and saying, well, I'm at work. If I work in the upstairs, in the loft room here in the house, and I shut the door and I say, well, I'm at work, but it isn't always appropriate. It isn't always effective as a boundary. And I suppose what comes up for me in listening to you as well, actually, it's that flexibility is, you've got to be open to that sometimes there will be pulls from home, just as you have to be open to the fact that sometimes there'll be pulls from work, and you have to manage those two things.
Yeah, and that's why I say I don't think I've got it right yet. Because that's in a constant state of flux. Um, and just as the business is forever changing, then that means that our lives are forever changing. It's one thing I've never been very good at is sticking to rules, like many entrepreneurs. I always question, well, why do we do it that way? But that applies to my own rules as well. I can make rules, and then I might think, no, that was a stupid rule, and I'll make
Right.
another one.
Does it serve you? Yeah, I love that. And so just switching on to anger. So, and if this isn't a comfortable subject, just do say so. But one of the things that I've been exploring with other dads on the podcast is kind of is really, it's not very spoken about really in any realm of fatherhood, but pretty much everybody I've spoken to, and again, this is my experience, has some wrestling with anger in relation to running a business, and then the, should we call it, obligations of home life, and how some of those two things kind of can enter into a space of clashing, because you need to be doing one thing and there's a pull to be doing something else, and maybe that creates some tension, and then sometimes that spills over into anger. And I just wondered, what your experience of that has been.
Well, of course, that's so tied in with guilt, isn't it? I'd say the times when I certainly have felt guilty is when I've lost my rag, and I think anger in that particular in situations like that is frustration. It's when you are maxed out. I think it's the same as I said about when you're texting and you haven't got enough cognitive control to respond in the way that you would wish to. I think it's the same with anger, where where you'll get a call from home or a text from home, or you'll get a text from work when you're at home. That's I think it's for me the overriding challenge is lack of time. Whether that's time at home or time at work, they are always in conflict, and because they are always in conflict, there is always, by definition, a tension. And where there's tension, there's the potential to get angry, because we are maxed out. If there isn't enough time, then there isn't enough time for something, then you are already at your limits. You're already trying to cram things in, to get something done, and that means that you've got very little left for responding in the way that your higher self would. You haven't got enough control often to just say, well, let's just take a step back from this and let's think about the situation. No, that often just goes out of the window, because you're already maxed out, and it doesn't take very much, therefore, to just tip you over the edge, and then you get angry, and then you get guilty. But and I think this time thing is huge, because anything that takes longer than you think it should do, it's very easy to view that as taking away time, taking away your opportunity to do other things, whether that's at work or at home. And I think where you are in that situation, then if you're not careful, anger is not far behind.
It's a brilliant articulation of it, actually. I love how you've described it, and I think that time kind of quotient in it is absolutely the determiner about whether you get angry or not. I love how you express that, and it kind of connects in with another question I had for you, which is something I've been exploring and with others, and that's really the kind of the notion of personal freedom within a relationship when you're a dad. And I was thinking back to your description of you just coming back from maternity leave after your daughter was born, and having a spring in your step, which I remember that feeling too, but also the seismic change in my universe having a child, and all my notions of personal freedom had to be completely recalibrated. And I wonder what your experience of that was.
Yeah, I think it's that's the sort of thing that can make itself known over the years. I didn't feel unfortunate. I know not everybody is like this. At the beginning, I didn't feel like all of my personal freedom had been taken away. Not least because I was so exhausted. So, all I wanted personal freedom to do was sleep.
Yeah, right. But even that is one, isn't it? It's not, you don't get to sleep in the way that you did before you have a child.
No. And the second one in particular, where you've got, you think you've got no time, and then you have a second child, and then you really find out what no time is, because you can't sleep when the first one's sleeping, because the odds are the second one isn't sleeping, and lots of other things. So it's it's only, I think, later on where you just you realize that you have you give over an awful lot of time to business and to the family, and that, I think, is, I don't know if there's any answer to it. Those listeners among your audience who are just starting out on this journey, I would say just be careful, because because of the nature of business being all consuming, if you're anything like me, you will find that business and family have basically taken up all your time. And then as the kids get older, kids get older and they leave home. So finding time to nurture and develop friendships can just seem, especially when you're exhausted, can seem like a dispensable luxury. You really, it's like, yeah, thanks, I'll just go to sleep. And I remember, resolving to go out once a week and get down the pub and, meet friends for a chat. And that's never lasted that long because I think simply because business and family are such powerful draws, they have to be the priority. And I just noticed that if you get down the pub, you feel tired the next day, and you can't afford to have a tired day. You can't afford to, certainly I've never been very good at that. Saying, you know what, I'm going to have a day off today because I went down the pub last night. To be honest, I'm getting better at it now, but certainly in the past, I've tried to push through, and so it's so easy to say, do you know what, I'm not going to go out because I'll be exhausted tomorrow and I've got work to do. So it's very important to try to get that balance. But I'd be very interested to hear other people's experiences.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
looking forward to listening to some more of this podcast because, I'm sure I can't be alone in that respect.
No, I think many people would experience some relief in hearing you say that, because it seems like you don't have to square the circle in that sense. You're just kind of dealing with reality.
Yeah.
The other thought that popped into my head, Rob, was that coming back to something you were saying earlier about you really have a mission with your business, and and I'm sure many entrepreneurs would identify with this, but it really shines out in how you talk about written communication and the nature of emphasis and the work you do. And I wonder, when you have that sense of mission or purpose or and are so aligned with it, that the personal freedom issue isn't such a big deal. I'm making a big assumption here, because actually you're doing what you love.
Yeah, it doesn't
If you weren't
feel
doing
like
what
work.
you love, it might be a much greater attention.
Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't feel like work.
Mm.
If I've always said if I won the lottery, I would do this. I really would. That's why I don't do the lottery. So what's the point?
Mm.
And I'm 55 now. I can't see myself retiring anytime soon. I thought I would. I thought I would be here and either retired or looking forward to retirement. And I feel like I'm just getting started. I feel so energized by what I do. Why would I retire? It's yeah. I certainly know. I mean, I'm sure any entrepreneur will identify with this. Working on your own business is a fantastic cure for boredom, because I'm never bored,
Right.
ever. I've never, not since I left my job, my last proper job, which was working for a magazine. I left that, and that was the last time I had that Sunday evening feeling, where the weekend's over and it's, oh God, I gotta go to work tomorrow. I've never had that since, not in 21 years.
Amazing.
So yeah, I would do this, and hopefully I'll stop when I start being an embarrassment to my staff and they have to humor me. Maybe they do that now and they just don't tell me. But, yeah.
Who knows? Maybe somebody will write in when they hear the
podcast.
Yeah. Just a final question, really, kind of to wrap things up. Given what you've been sharing, how would you feel about either of your children joining you in the business?
Oh, what a great question! It's a Columbo moment. It's just one thing. How would I feel about them joining me in the business? I don't think either of them would want to. They're very much cutting their own path, and whereas I can definitely recognize myself in them. They've got different interests, and so my first feeling would be, why? Can't you? Why not do what you really want to do? Because I am. I think. Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know how I feel about businesses like that. That kind of, for want of a better word, nepotism. I would honestly, I would think about the effects on the rest of my staff. But I think perhaps what's more likely, who knows? My kids are still in full-time education, but perhaps what's more likely is that they will one day start their own businesses, and maybe I'll be able to help. So that would be good. I think. Yeah, I would just be puzzled if they wanted to be in this business, because I can't see that happening.
I can see that, but it also sounds like you wouldn't discourage them from being entrepreneurs.
Oh, not at all. No, quite the opposite. Yeah, I would be. Well, I'm very proud of them now, and I'm proud of them for what they do and the effort they make. Not what they achieve, although they are achieving great things. But I think if they decided they wanted to be entrepreneurs, I would be very proud of them for that too, and I'd do everything I could to help them. They may even take some of that advice. Who knows?
And there speaks a loving entrepreneur dad. It's been brilliant talking to you, Rob.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right. Take care, Matt.
And I completely forgot to ask Rob, where can people find out more about him? Sorry about that, Rob. We're just hopping on again just to get that recorded.
No, not at all. They can find me in two places, either at our main website, which is it's the Emphasis website, which is www.writing-skills.com. That's obviously writing with a W. And then there's my personal blog, which I don't update that often, but it's where I use it's what I use for more opinion-based stuff, and also updates on the book research I'm doing, and that's just simply robashton.com, ASHTON.
Brilliant. Thanks, Rob, and sorry for missing that out. Appreciate the information.